As a transplanted southerner, I know what it's like to roast in the summertime heat. But even up here in the Northeast, you'll get some days where the humidity is downright ignorant. That's how my Uncle Henry phrases it, turning the word into a dirty expletive. Sweet Jesus, he'll say, it's downright ignorant out here. Come July and August, Uncle Henry's farm is my sanctuary from the urban madness, the hot asphalt, shimmering glass. His property is an oasis where the sun sets early behind treetops, and the weather vane on the peak of the barn roof is always fluttering in the northwesterly breeze. The farmhouse is mostly shielded from the midday sun by his ancient oak trees, a quartet of towering sentinels that rise up to brush against the sky. Henry's farm's a good place, and old Uncle Henry is a good fella. Henry's led something of an interesting life, to put it mildly, and he's a lot of very unusual tales to tell. Sometimes they're whimsical in nature, sometimes they're thought-provoking and sobering. But every now and then, he'll tell me a story that's pure nightmare fuel. I'd like to think that the latter variety are either wildly embellished or outright fabrications, but honestly, I have my doubts. As my uncle is fond of saying when I became skeptical in the face of some bizarre turn in our conversation, "Ah, hell, it's a big, weird old world out there, kiddo, and you really don't know jack shit about it." Uncle Henry had been rambling around the house by himself since my aunt passed last year, and he's always glad for some company. He'll toss a couple six-packs into his old cooler and we'll retreat to the comfort of the wooden swing chairs, the ones that face the valley, chairs that Henry had built with his own hands in the same year Elvis was famously censored on the Ed Sullivan Show. Before long, we'll end up falling into our long-running conversation about all the world and everything in it. Just shooting the breeze, waxing philosophical as we pass away in a devastatingly hot Sunday afternoon. Last Sunday, as usual, our discussion veered into the 14 realms of the very strange. This time, with the claim that Henry had once seen a UFO floating above his very own field in June of 1955. Came out of the house after lunch, and there it was, hovering down in the valley beside the irrigation pond. It was floating 3 feet off the ground, so perfectly goddamn still, I could have been hanging from a string. Like a giant ball bearing, no seams or rivets. Perfect globe made out of some kind of highly polished metal. Shone so bright in the sunlight I could hardly look at it. Didn't make any sound at all, this thing. It's craft. And yeah, I do believe it was a piloted craft, you understand? It was a spaceship. No doubt about it. Anyhow, I stood there with my jaw on the ground and stared at the craft for a minute, maybe 2, and then it shot straight up in the air. Poof. It was gone in a single second, just incredibly fast. I tell you right now, no one on this earth, living or dead, no one could have ever constructed such a marvelous machine from another world. Why didn't you take a picture of the thing, Henry? I demanded. You didn't think to run for your camera? I mean, come on, man. Henry flapped a dismissive hand and scowled. I couldn't have moved a muscle if my life depended on it. Sometimes people freeze up like a rabbit when they're scared. It happens to the best of us. I asked, why were you scared? And Henry thought about it carefully for a while before answering, taking time to mull it over while he tore the plastic off a fresh pack of smokes. "'Cause it wasn't right," he said. "No way in hell that thing would have been able to fly, let alone hover around in midair. How can a round lump of metal zoom around like that? It defied the laws of physics, the laws of every other goddamn thing. That craft really was alien in every sense of the word. It scared me." Henry looked thoughtful. He went quiet for a while, and I watched him from the corner of my eye. I had a feeling that Henry was about to push me down the proverbial rabbit hole once again. I thought, well, it should be interesting, and I patiently waited for him to start. "It's a big, weird old world out there," Henry mused. He lit a cigarette with his tarnished old Zippo and hacked into his fist. He wheezed, "Oh, it's so long ago. His land was still uncultivated and wild. Most of the farms on this road didn't even exist until the late 40s. Thousands of years, this whole area was nothing but woods, gullies. People who lived in these forests believed in the elemental forces, light and dark. They believed in magic. He blew out a swirling cloud of blue-tinted smoke, the luxurious exhalation that ended in a coughing fit. When he was done, Henry said, "It happened a few years after the UFO incident. It had been sometime in the early 60s after I got let go by the electric company. Moved back to the farm. The whole thing started with me waking up early one morning and saying to myself, 'Fuck it, I'm going rabbit hunting.' Scrubland at the back of the farm was always teeming with the little buggers. You could hunker down just about anywhere, bag one in no time." His lips twitched for a brief smile. There one second, gone the next. "Rabbit stew, kiddo. Used to love it. Your grandma made a great rabbit stew. I haven't had it in many years. Can't bring myself to shoot a living creature anymore. I don't know why. Maybe it's because my own time's coming." I grimaced at this and said, "Oh, don't say that. You got a lot of good years left." "I don't know about that." Anyway, I went out to the back of the property. I hid behind a clump of sumac, about 22. The sun was just barely peeking over the treetops. Where the light hit the morning mist made it feel like I was in a dream. Henry looked me in the eyes and said, "I'll tell you something, kiddo. Under the right circumstances, when light meets dark, there's magic in the air. Sometimes it's a good sort of magic. Sometimes it's bad. Either way, there's no denying it's real. You don't believe that? Go out in the fields tonight around 8 o'clock and maybe you'll see for yourself. If you stand there real quiet and just watch, maybe you'll see it happen. And you'll know that I'm right." So I'm sitting there as the light pushes back the dark, waiting and watching for a nice-sized rabbit. And I'll be damned if someone doesn't come crawling out of the gully. He's leaning on a stick to keep himself from falling over into the dirt. I sat perfectly still. I watched this dirty, bedraggle-looking apparition come hobbling into the daylight. There was a real bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. The only thought in my head was that he was tainted. His stick broke in two. He fell at the edge of the field. Sound of his body hitting the dirt snapped me out of my trance. I come running over. I saw it was a native fella. Older guy with gray hair. His denim overalls were soaked through with blood. Uncle Henry reached into the old cooler that sat on the ground between us and fished out a fresh beer. He cracked it open slowly, taking a pause to gather his thoughts. I put my rifle down and rolled him over. The left side of his face was hanging in shreds. I could see his teeth through the hole in his cheek. He's torn up like he got mauled by a jungle cat. I say to him, "Holy Jesus, what done this to you?" And he was too far gone to speak. There's nothing I could do but lay him down in the dirt and let him die. Henry stopped to light another smoke. He was seized by another fit of coughing, one dragged closer to the grave. He squinted at me through the haze and gasped. I thought he was gone. I tried to close his eyelids. Heard somewhere you're supposed to do that when someone dies. They wouldn't stay closed. They kept sliding open again. I reached for a fresh beer of my own. I had a feeling I was going to need it. Yeah, I definitely never heard this one before. That's crazy. What happened to him? Hush, Henry snapped. I'm getting there. I made a zipper motion across my lips and motioned for him to continue. Henry speared me with a sour glance and continued. I hightailed it back to the house and told your grandparents. Ma forced me to sit down and drink a mug of tea with some rum in there, calm my nerves. Your granddad, not your real one, mind you, but you already know that. Anyway, he jumped in the truck to go see for himself. When he came back, he was white as a ghost. Told me to call the cops. Henry fished another smoke out of his rumpled pack, taking his time with the procedure. He was staring off into the distance, gazing into the faded past with the failing eyes of a man in the twilight hour of his own existence. It pains me to think about it, but it's true. Henry probably isn't long for this world. And I'll miss him when he's gone. He had to be from the 55, Henry said. That's what we call the local native reserve of 55. It wasn't much more than a handful of dilapidated shacks standing in a clearing in the bush. You can get there on a dirt road led off Country Road 55. I've never been there myself, but I knew from Fred Walsh the fella could drop in most days, buy himself a jug of corn liquor. He was so inclined. It wasn't wise to go after dark, though, not if you didn't want to come back with your ass kicked up between your shoulder blades. I didn't much care for company after business hours. And when the cops finally showed up, they went out to the field and they gawked at the body like it was a display in a carnival sideshow. One of them yelled, "God damn, old Chief got liquored up and tried to wrestle a bear." The other one laughed until he was wiping tears from his eyes. They didn't have no respect at all. Didn't take any pictures, didn't comb the area for evidence, none of it. They just rolled up the body in our tarp and heaved it into the truck with their squad car. I could hardly believe it. We sat quietly for a little while, drinking our beers and looking down to the meadow and the valley. We're an ugly people living in a beautiful world, Henry sighed. Always been us versus them. That's the way it always will be. Anyway, just as we're finishing lunch, a homicide detective named Callahan comes rolling up the driveway in an unmarked Plymouth Fury. He was the most serious-looking man I ever met, face like a rock. He interviewed me and your grandpa at the kitchen table, asked a lot of questions. The one that really stuck with me was, have you ever seen any unusual tracks out in the fields? Well, your grandpa says, what do you mean exactly? Detective Callahan, he just shrugs it off. Left me wondering why a homicide detective be investigating an animal attack. Before he left, he advised us to start locking doors at night. Mama asked if we were in danger. He said, "Ma'am, we're always in danger. Start locking your doors." Henry smiled a little, nodded to himself, pitched his cigarette butt in the grass, and crushed it into the sole of his battered old work boots. Willie Van Klein came by later that afternoon. He was a Dutchman that owned the apple orchard down the road. Of course, the apple trees were gone long before we were even born. The entire orchard withered and died back in the early 70s. Just shriveled up and died, and there wasn't anything Willie could do about it. He committed suicide that winter. Cut his own throat with a straight razor. That's a story right there. See, before the Van Kleins bought that land, it belonged to some kind of Anabaptist sect, cult. Apparently, those folks straight out of Henry, stay on track. Willie came by later on and, right, Henry grunted. Old Willie said his whole house woke up just before midnight to his dogs losing their mind in the kennel. Howling and carrying on like Satan himself was standing in the barnyard. He jumped out of bed to see what was happening, and wham! Something slammed against the back door hard enough to crack it right down the middle. He came running down the stairs in his nightshirt. He yelled, "Get away from my house or I'll shoot!" Whatever was outside screamed like a banshee and kept pounding away at the door. Willie said, "The hell with this." He blasted a hole through his own door with his shotgun. The thing outside let a yowl like nothing he ever heard before. Took off for the woods. He said it's moving too fast to get a good look at it through the window. He saw that it was big. It was running on all fours. It had a set of big twisting antlers on either side of its head like a mature buck. But deer ain't generally known to come knocking at your door. I didn't know any animal that could take both barrels of a shotgun and not even bleed. There wasn't a single drop of blood in this Porsche. Ran off without a scratch. Henry smirked crookedly at his beer can and shook his head. Now, everyone knew that Willie Van Klein wasn't a fan of law enforcement or rules in general. He would have made a damn fine Viking warrior, that man. Although Willie didn't call the cops, took matters into his own hands. Put his hound on the scent, followed the Kurt's trail into the woods. Said he was headed straight for the 55. I motioned for him to stop and say, okay, so after I tried to kick in his door, it headed for the reserve and attacked the guy you found the next morning, right? I'm understanding this correctly. Henry shrugged and said, maybe he was heading back to the reserve where it came from. We had absolutely no proof of that. The more we talked about it, the more it seemed likely. See how fast it happened? It's us versus them. You don't have a question of what you're doing. We just do it. That line of thinking will be our downfall. Anyway, who should come rattling up the road in his old Plymouth as we were standing in the driveway but Fred Walsh. Now, it just so happened Fred was one of their best customers out there in the 55. Freddie was a good fella. But he was a drunk. He lived off a disability check from his time in Korea. Lost 3 fingers, gained a permanent limp during the Battle of Bastion perimeter. Reddy said he drank to deal with the phantom pain in his missing fingers. The corn liquor was all he could afford on a fixed income. I always thought he would have been drunk either way, but hell, it didn't really matter. He was a good drunk. Always cracking wise, smiling away. Not a mean bone in his body, that man. Well, Fred didn't sound like he was 3 sheets to the wind just yet, but he was definitely on his way. I explained the situation. He said, well, shit. Yeah, that's hell of a thing, ain't it? But I'll tell you right now, you guys should probably stay away from there. There's not going to be feeling very hospitable right now, if you know what I mean. Willie told him there's no harm in trying. And a growl in his voice said we were going whether Fred Walsh liked it or not, so we piled in the car. Fred took us out to the 55. And like I said earlier, it wasn't much to look at, just a little collection of piss-poor shanties leaning around a big community fire pit. When we pulled up, saw a few of the men sitting around a smoky fire in the pit. I didn't look very impressed, having visitors. Fred shaked his head at us and said, oh boy, here we go. Told you, didn't I? Just let me do the talking. These boys ain't in the mood to make new friends. Now, Fred Walsh, he walked up to the fire with his hat in his hands. He said, I'm real sorry to be coming out like this, but we have a mutual problem on our hands. Whatever it is that attacked the old fella, St. Critter paid a visit to my friend here. Tried to break his door down, damn near got inside. Said his dog got on the scent and followed her here. I'm not presuming anything, you understand? We're hoping you might be able to tell us what's going on. Well, they all sat there and they ignored us for a while, staring into the fire, sipping their whiskey. Finally, a big old boy with a scar on his cheek, braided hair, looks up and he says, you're interrupting a wake. You need to get back to your car and fuck off right now. I say we were outnumbered 3-1, and I thought, yep, it's time to go. Big Willie wasn't going anywhere just yet. He walked up close to the fire. He said, you people know what he's talking about. I can see it in your faces. I don't want any trouble from you, but I won't leave until you tell us what you know about this thing. A big old boy with a scar gave Willie a grin like a knife. He says, you people. He said, what do you mean by that? Fred jumps in. He goes, now, Elwood. Willie didn't mean nothing by it. Oh, but it was already out there. Someone else sitting by the fire stands up, says he means Injuns, Redskins, Wahoo, isn't that right? Now, Henry paused to fish himself another beer from the slushy ice in the cooler. He grimaced as the cold carbonation hit his parched throat. I could see Willie getting mad. Crossed those tree trunk arms, said, you're putting words in my mouth. I didn't mean that. Look, I'm sorry we're disturbing you. I am, but I'm not going to leave till you tell me what I want to know. Something tried to kick in my door last night. It was big, it had antlers, but it wasn't a buck. It ran like a jungle cat. This thing walked right past my chickens and went for my house instead. I shot the son of a bitch. I didn't give a damn. The hell is it? The natives looked around at each other, and one by one, they started to laugh. It was nervous laughter, right? They were scared. Willie didn't see that, of course. He just saw people laughing at him. And he wasn't about to... Oh, shit. Henry's beer slipped out of his hand, hit the grass in an eruption of foam. He cursed under his breath and waved off my attempt to retrieve it. Fumble fingers, he grumbled, and he poured the rest out into a thunderous frown. Been dropping things lately. I hardly got feeling in my hands anymore. Give me another one, would you? I reluctantly passed him another beer. I could see that Henry was already getting drunk. I wondered about the condition of his liver. He had a hard time popping it open. I had to restrain the urge to pluck the can out of his hands to do it for him, which would have undoubtedly pissed him off to no end. I was swamped by another curling wave of that melancholic headache. It'd be hard to watch Henry go. He was one of the good ones. Oh. Well, he looked like he had just about had enough, Henry said. And that Elwood character, well, he was more than ready to square up. Someone was about to get hurt. Fred Walsh waved his arms like a referee and hollered, "Calm down, come on now. This ain't gonna settle nothing, everybody relax." Elwood stared him down until Freddie looked away. He said, "Did you ever tell your buddies about those fingers you lost?" Fred did a double take. Got this look for a second. I don't know, he just looked different, like a different kind of person entirely. He was there and gone in a flash, but I caught it. And it was just Freddie again. All red in the face, grasping for a comeback, mumbled something like, "I don't know what you're talking about," and looked down at his feet. Elwood grinned that furious grin at him and said, "Sure you don't, Freddie, sure." He turned to the rest of us and said, "Let me tell you people something. Winter lives in our hearts. Your boogeyman is closer than you think." And he walked up right close to Freddie, still smiling away, and he says, "You come from me. I'll be waiting for you, Whitaco." We all stopped dead to that. Henry snorted. We didn't know what he was getting at. Something about the way he said it made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. And Freddie got all flustered and said, "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Elwood was already walking away. He walked into his shack, slammed the door behind him. The rest of them got up from the fire and went into their own homes. Before you know it, we're standing there all by ourselves. It's time to go. Freddie threw his hands up and said, "See, I told you, didn't I? Come on." He all jumped in the car, and by Jesus, was I ever glad to be leaving. I had that real bad feeling in the pit of my stomach again. I was always starting to get gloomy in the woods. I don't want to be out there after dark. Henry looked at me with his lips pressed into a tight little line. His eyes were blank and shrouded by the past. He was living the memory. I was right there with him. You maybe got halfway back to the main road when your grandpa pipes up and says, "What do you mean, Freddie? The thing he said about your fingers." Freddie glared at him in the rearview mirror and stopped the car. His face was redder than cherry tomatoes, right? He didn't say nothing for a moment, just sat there looking straight ahead, and then goes, "Hold on, fellas, I gotta take a piss." I said, "Jesus, Freddie, can't I wait a few minutes?" But Freddie goes, "Hell no, I'm about to burst, give me a minute." Yeah. We wait. He never comes back. We went out looking for him. Freddie Walsh was nowhere to be seen. Walked into the woods, vanished. And he took the goddamn keys with him. Henry fumbled another cigarette out of his pack. He stared at it and said, "These things will be the death of me, I suppose. Watch them murder your grandpa, your Uncle Ernest, your Aunt Gertie. God knows who else. I still can't give them up. Some folks die of old age, others die from circumstances they can't control. The rest of us, we end up killing ourselves one way or another. Why is that?" I pressed my lips together in an unhappy little line and stretched my hand out for another smoke. I attended all 3 of those funerals, but there I was. still lighting up the coffin nails at least once an hour like clockwork. The truth is that no one actually believes in their own demise. Not really. You could stand in line and watch 1,000 people die at the hangman's noose before you. But when your turn comes, you'd still somehow be surprised when that rough circle of rope drops over your own head. It's just how we are. So completely egocentric. We simply can't imagine the world plugging along without us. I settled with a yawn and a dismissive shrug. Sometimes it's better to respond to an uncomfortable question with no answer at all, if you understand what I mean. I said, I don't know, Henry. Who knows what makes people tick? We do what we do, and we don't question why. What's with all the existential mortality stuff anyway? You got lots of good years left. No need to be talking like that. It's because there's winter in our hearts, Henry said, and his voice was tinged with sorrow. It's true. Most of the time, people choose to do the right thing. Some of us rather howl along with the icy winds. Those people are damned. Henry paused to pick a flake of tobacco off his lips. He studied the lit end of his cigarette in morbid fascination. Sun's already gone behind the tree line, he murmured. Lights fade into darkness. I could feel that bad magic gathering in the shadows. Hairs were standing up on my arms. I said, to hell with it. He hadn't come back. Hoof it out of here. Found a flashlight in Freddy's trunk. It's a good thing, too, because it was so dark I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I almost shit myself every time I heard something scuffling around in the woods. I was convinced it was following us, creeping along, watching from behind the trees. I didn't know what it was. I was positive it was there. I knew it wanted to eat us alive. Henry scrubbed the back of his hands across his mouth and nodded to himself. I was scared, but even worse, I felt helpless. Somehow that's even worse than being shit-ass terrified. Much worse. I knew there wouldn't be a goddamn thing I could do when it came for us. I think fear and helplessness was just as nourishing to this thing as living flesh and blood. It was prolonging the hunt to drink it all in. Every little bit. I heard a branch break close to the tree line. Shone the flashlight into the woods, and just for a split second, I saw something peeking out from behind the trees. A set of burning eyes glaring at us. 8 or 9 feet off the ground, I saw what looked like a sloping, misshapen head. An enormous pair of antlers. Just for a moment. A heartbeat or two. Then a set of headlights popped up in the distance. We ran towards a light in a blind panic. It was your grandma on a farm truck. She came looking for us, God bless her. I'd never been so relieved in my life. I asked him, "Did you see something out there?" No one would admit to it. We dropped Willie off and burned straight home to call the police. I told him Freddy disappeared in the woods, left his car behind. He said I'd send someone out to look for him, and that's the last I heard of it till the next morning. I guess all the fear and adrenaline drove me right in, because I was out like a light as soon as my head hit the pillow. I woke up to your grandma hammering on my door like a goddamn cannon. She yelled, "Get up! The policeman's here. He wants to talk to you." Henry took a deep swallow from his beer and made a sour face. He poured out the rest and tossed the empty into the cooler. "Warm as piss," he grumbled. "I don't know. Guess I was about comatose that night because it was almost 10 o'clock. Your grandpa was already out in the fields. I came downstairs, found Callahan sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He smiled at Ma, asked if he could speak to me alone for a while. She went outside to pick some peas for supper, and as soon as she stepped out the door, Callahan stopped smiling. He said, "Get yourself some coffee, have a seat. I need to talk to you." I asked him if it was about Freddy. Callahan just gave me a straight look. He says, "Go on, have a seat." He looked exhausted, like he'd been up all night. Watched him pull something from his pocket, set it down on the table. Silver letter opener. Callahan taps it with his fingers. He says, "We pulled this out of a dead man's hand last night. A fellow named Elwood Allen, you know?" I nodded. I said, "I don't know him exactly, but I met him." Callahan looked like he was satisfied with that. He said, "Someone killed him last night. Kicked his door in. Butchered him. Mr. Allen stabbed his attacker with a letter opener during the struggle. Found them both laying on the floor of his shanty. Elwood and his murderer. Your missing pal, Frederick Walsh." Henry lit another cigarette and coughed out a lungful of smoke. "I just fell out of my chair," he said. "I says to the cop, 'Holy hell, what happened?'" Callahan shook his head. Looked like he was struggling to find the right words, and finally he says, "How well did you know Freddie Walsh?" I said, "I knew Freddie for 7 years. Pretty well, I guess." Callahan leaned in closer, asked, "Do you know why he left the service?" I said he left because he got hurt in the war. Callahan looked me in the eye and said, "Yeah. He lost 3 fingers in Korea, but it didn't happen the way you think it did. See, Freddie had himself a dishonorable discharge as he was caught doing something awful to a young girl. Caught red-handed by her father. The villagers were going to put his head on a chopping block right then and there, but another enlisted man heard the commotion, tried to make a deal with him. Take just a finger and spare Freddie's life. They dickered around it for a while. They ended up settling on 3 fingers, and a good hard kick to the kneecap. I winced and absently rubbed my own kneecap. It was no good spot to suffer a nasty fracture. But the patella was a particularly bad one. He was lucky to get out of there alive, though, wasn't he? Fucking scumbag. What happened to him after that? Freddie was court-martialed. Did 2 years in Portsmouth. Callahan said it should have been 20 as far as he was concerned, but somehow Freddie got lucky once again. Bad people often have the best luck. He was even awarded a disability check when he got released, so he ended up moving here, made some new friends. During that time, he moved on from hurting people to committing murder. Callahan said Freddie had a chest in his bedroom full of pictures, locks of hair, all kinds of mementos, but that wasn't enough for Freddie. He had to take it one step further. He started eating them. I grunted in disgust. Jesus Christ. And you had no idea? None at all, Henry said quietly. He had bags of human flesh in his icebox. I still wouldn't know. He became the monster that lurked on the inside. Lost himself to the winner in his heart, mind, body, and soul. Henry's voice dropped even lower, and I had to listen carefully to catch his quavering words. Callahan told me Elwood was still alive when they arrived on the scene. He said one word, Whitaco. And then he slipped away. Now, Cree sometimes call it by that name. Yeah. Others know it as Wendigo. The monster lives inside of us. A frozen wind that howls in your soul. You can believe whatever you want, but the detective told me, and he was goddamn serious, believe me. He told me that Freddie died before he could finish changing back into a man. Callahan said Freddie's corpse was a half man, half monster hybrid from the depths of hell. One leg like a goat, one antler protruding from his skull, his face elongated into a hairy snout. Told me it looked like a childhood nightmare. He said it was eating him alive while he stabbed it with his letter opener. Couldn't even imagine the horror that man experienced before he died. I chewed that over for a minute before I told him that Elwood was expecting him to come back. He even said so before he left. He mentioned something about Freddie's fingers, too. It's like he knew what Freddie had become. Callahan said I wouldn't be surprised Elwood was the enlisted man that saved Freddie's hide in Korea. They were lifelong friends, those two. He knew Freddie better than anyone, I'd guess. Well, Henry exclaimed. My jaw dropped on the table when I heard that. I said, well, holy shit. Callahan had to laugh in spite of himself. Looked like he needed a stiff drink, full 12 hours of sleep. He said, yep. They were thick as thieves. You have to wonder if Elwood wasn't somehow involved in the murders. It's hard to imagine that any decent man would stand behind such a degenerate son of a bitch. As we'll never know. Elwood's neighbors had torched his house when he left, doused the place in gasoline, set it on fire. He said the fire would purify the ground, and that's fine by me. Just accidental fire. 2 people dead. No surviving family on either side. A lot easier than the truth. Callahan stood up to leave and said, you better count your blessings you're still alive. Freddie took you out there so he can get rid of anyone who might be close to discovering his secret. You didn't stand a chance, because you didn't have one thing that could stop him. He held up a letter opener. He said, silver. Dropped in at the library in town before I came here. From what I gather, some legends say you can kill him with silver. Elwood knew that. You folks, you would have been shit out of luck. Callahan started to leave, but he turned around at the door and gave me a real somber look. Says, the 2 patrolmen who came out here yesterday have been fired. A new world on the horizon, a better world. There'll be no room for people like that. Have yourself a good day. This conversation never happened. Henry's words faded into silence, and I realized his tale had come to an end. We sat quietly for a while and stared down into the valley below us. The very same valley where Henry had once seen a UFO in June of 1955. This world of ours is filled with mystery. A place of wonders. When the light meets the dark, there's magic in the air. It's too goddamn hot, Henry snapped, and he shattered the somber atmosphere with a tremendous cracker of a fart. Fuck it, let's go inside and cool off. Next time you come out, remind me to tell you about what happened to Willie Van Klein, his orchard. Now that's a story. After a little supper, I took Henry's advice and I wandered back into the fields. I stood very still and watched as the sun sank below the horizon. And when the daylight faded to darkness, I swore that I could feel something in the air. A faint buzz of static electricity against my skin. A sense of being subtly stretched between the state of consciousness we perceive as reality and something else. Something both surreal and darkly divine. For a fleeting moment in time, I could actually feel the magic. And it was both terrifying and exhilarating. And then the twilight faded to full dark, and I hastened back to the safety of the farmhouse. It was almost time to go back to the city. The hectic place of constant hurry and controlled chaos. I felt a tinge of sadness as the farm receded into the rearview mirror, as I always do. But I'll be back soon enough. Henry will be waiting with his cooler and his stories, and he'll weave a dark spell that'll transport me to another place in another time. Henry's stories create their very own kind of magic. A good kind that takes you away from yourself for a while. It's the best kind of magic, really. Henry's farm is a good place. And Henry is a good fella. I'll be back soon enough, rest assured. But for now, the story's come to an end. And it's time to bid you all a good night. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. And if you're not listening to tonight's episode of the podcast, then you can on Spotify or other places that people listen to podcasts, because I only use Spotify. And if you're not watching tonight's video, then you can on YouTube and nowhere else, because that's the only place I upload videos. And if you've done both of those things, then I want to say thank you for subscribing and clicking that like button and leaving a comment that's nice and friendly that I can respond to and give a little heart to. A big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Jakob Fenske, Stephanie Butler, Jordan Humble, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Emma, Brenna, LaQueda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante, Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, Mephistopheles, CursepoxPrimarch, Bastion, Beefcake, M, Jesus Cornejo, Yarghoul, Clownible, Amber Clark, Jay Kierns, Dakota Lane Whetstone, Himbo Jerry, Crusader Chocobo, Adamarius, Estebean, Nate Cull, Our Minsect Time, Xylobones, Angelus, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Levita Galvin, That Creepy Chick, Red Shadow Cat, Turtleman, Cryolinian, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Ika Limchalk, Dirty Diver 030, Matt Bach, Voice of Sand, Spike Melted Lake, Tolly Sue, William King, Darth Miver, Sashi Suzaku, Coconut 509, Stricket, Freddy Krueger, Lisa Cottrell, Hades Nephew, Acid System, Mog, Kiwi the Sloth, Fester's Lampshade, Nico Kyle, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. To all of you guys, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for being a huge support to me. Thank you to everybody who's in the description down below, and thank you to everyone who can even support $1 just on Patreon to help keep the content coming.